Sometimes the human ego is so massive, or the human sense of humor so warped, that not even the end of existence can stop a punchline. Today, we are looking at 10 people who used their final moments on this earth to deliver insults, brag about their drinking habits, deliver accidental comedy, or troll the entire world one last time. From emperors mocking their own divinity to generals getting fact-checked by a bullet mid-sentence, these are the weirdest, funniest, and most legendary final statements ever recorded. Prepare yourself, because as it turns out, humans stay weird until the very, very end. Number 1. The disciplined departure of George Washington. George Washington was a man who lived his life by a set of 110 rules of civility. He was a man of cold, hard discipline. He didn't just lead the Continental Army, he was the Continental Army. He didn't just hold the presidency, he invented the dignity of the office. So it should come as no surprise that when death came for him in December of 1799, Washington treated it like a logistical problem to be solved with military precision. He was suffering from a brutal throat infection, likely epiglottitis, which made every breath feel like swallowing jagged glass. The medical treatment of the time was frankly more dangerous than the disease. Doctors were draining pints of his blood, blistering his skin, and forcing him to swallow mixtures of vinegar and sage. Most men would be screaming, crying, or begging for a miracle. Washington sat up in his bed and began giving his secretary, Tobias Lear, final instructions for his burial. He wanted to make sure he wasn't buried for at least 3 days, as he had a lingering fear of being buried alive. He checked his own pulse. Imagine that. The man is dying, and he is manually counting his own heartbeat, monitoring his own system's failure, like a general watching a retreating line of soldiers. When he felt the final rhythm skip, he didn't give a grand speech about the future of America. He didn't offer a vision of the stars. He looked at his doctor and simply said, "It is well." That was it. A 2-word status report. He wasn't happy, he wasn't sad, he was finished. He reviewed his life, saw that the ledger balanced, and approved his own checkout. It is the most Washington exit possible. Stoic, professional, and completely devoid of drama. He died the way he lived, as a very patriotic, very disciplined statue. Number 2. The twisted flex of Dylan Thomas. If George Washington was the sober general of history, Dylan Thomas was the drunken poet of the void. Thomas was a man whose words could move mountains. His poetry was raw, rhythmic, and obsessed with the struggle between life and death. His most famous line, "Do not go gentle into that good night," has become the anthem for everyone fighting against the end. In November 1953, Thomas was in New York City, a place that was basically a playground for his worst impulses. He was a legendary drinker, the kind of man who could outconsume a small army and still recite Shakespeare. After a massive, soul-crushing bender at the White Horse Tavern, a spot still famous today because of him, he stumbled back to the Hotel Chelsea. He didn't look at the moonlight and think of a poem. He didn't reflect on his children or his legacy. He looked at his assistant and delivered the ultimate drunk flex. He proudly declared, "I've had 18 straight whiskeys. I think that's the record." Shortly after, he fell into a coma. He never woke up. The man who told the world to rage against the dying of the light ended his own story by bragging about a personal best at the bar. It is tragic, it is hilarious, and it is peak Dylan Thomas. He didn't go gentle, he just went completely hammered. Number 3. The deadpan deity, Emperor Vespasian. Ancient Rome was a place of grand titles and massive egos. If you were an emperor, you weren't just a politician, you were a living god, or at least you would be as soon as you died. The Roman Senate had a tradition of apotheosis, where they would formally vote to turn a dead emperor into a god. Emperor Vespasian, however, was not your typical Roman aristocrat. He was a battle-hardened soldier who had worked his way up from the bottom. He was famous for his dry wit and his hatred of royal nonsense. He once famously taxed public urinals because he needed the money, telling his son that money doesn't smell. In 79 AD, as a fatal bout of diarrhea was draining the life out of him, Vespasian looked around at the solemn priests and the crying attendants who were already preparing to worship him. He saw the absurdity of it all. He was a man who had spent his life in the mud of military camps, and now these people were going to build temples to him? He leaned back, likely rolled his eyes, and whispered, "Vae puto Deus fio," which translates to, "Oh dear, I think I'm becoming a god." It is the greatest piece of deadpan sarcasm in the history of the Mediterranean. He was mocking his own death, mocking his own religion, and mocking the very empire he led, all with his final breath. He died the way he lived, a man who refused to believe his own hype. Number 4. The Whiskey Empire's Last Call, Jack Daniel. The story of Jack Daniel is a cautionary tale about why you should never lose your temper with inanimate objects. Jack was the king of Tennessee whiskey, a man who built a global empire on a very specific recipe and a very recognizable square bottle. In 1905, Jack went to work early. He tried to open his office safe, but he couldn't remember the combination. He tried again and again. In a fit of classic short-tempered rage, he kicked the massive iron safe with his foot. He broke his big toe. Now, in the modern world, you get some ice and an aspirin. In 1905, a broken toe was a death sentence. Infection set in. Gangrene followed. Over the next 6 years, the infection slowly ate its way up his leg, requiring multiple amputations. It was a slow-motion execution caused by a stubbed toe. When he finally lay on his deathbed in 1911, the man who had spent his entire life perfecting the world's most famous sipping whiskey had one final request. He didn't ask for a priest. He didn't ask for his lawyer. He looked up and said, "One last drink, please." It is the most perfect piece of brand consistency in history. He was born in whiskey, he lived in whiskey, and he wanted to go out with the taste of Tennessee on his tongue. To this day, Jack Daniel's marketing teams couldn't write a better ending.
Number 5. The Final Critique of Karl Marx. Karl Marx was a man of millions of words. He wrote Das Kapital, he wrote the Communist Manifesto, he wrote letters, essays, and pamphlets until his fingers probably bled. He was a man who believed that if you had an idea, you should write 500 pages about it. So when he was dying in London in 1883, sitting in his armchair, his housekeeper felt the weight of the moment. This was the man who had reshaped the political thought of the entire world. Surely he had one final shimmering nugget of wisdom to leave behind for the proletariat. She approached him with a notebook and asked if he had any last words for posterity. Marx looked at her with pure, unadulterated annoyance. He was a man who hated bourgeois sentimentality. He snapped his final sentence. "Go on, get out. Last words are for fools who haven't said enough." Then he died. It is the ultimate intellectual burn. He was essentially telling the world, if you didn't understand what I said in the last 20,000 pages, a 10-word sentence on my deathbed isn't going to help you. It was a final critique of the very idea of a memorable exit. Number 6. The Shocking Pun of James French. In 1966, James French was a convicted murderer facing the ultimate penalty in Oklahoma, the electric chair. Usually, the final statement in an execution is a moment of deep regret, a plea for forgiveness, or a claim of innocence. But James French was a man who appreciated the power of a good headline. As he was being strapped into the chair, with the electrodes being placed on his skin and the leather straps tightened, he saw a group of reporters sitting in the observation gallery.
These were the men who would write the story of his death for the morning papers. French leaned toward them and asked, "How's this for your headline tomorrow?" French fries. He didn't just accept his death, he edited it. He took a surname that was about to be forgotten and linked it forever to his method of execution and a fast food side dish. It is a level of gallows humor that most comedians couldn't achieve with a month of rehearsal. He went out not as a villain, but as the author of the darkest pun in human history. Number 7. The tune-up of Jean-Philippe Rameau. If you think your boss is a micromanager, be glad you weren't the priest at Jean-Philippe Rameau's deathbed. Rameau was the king of French Baroque music. He was a man who believed that the universe was held together by the laws of harmony. To him, a wrong note wasn't just a mistake, it was a sin against nature. In 1764, Rameau was 81 years old and fading fast. A priest was brought in to perform the last rites, the sacred ceremony meant to prepare his soul for heaven. Part of this involves singing hymns and prayers. The problem? The priest was terrible. He was flat, he was off-key, he was butchering the music. Rameau, who was supposed to be focusing on his eternal soul, found the bad singing physically painful. He summoned his very last breath, pointed a finger at the man of God, and shouted, "What the devil are you singing to me, priest? You are out of tune." He died immediately after. He didn't care about heaven, he cared about the pitch. He refused to enter the afterlife accompanied by a flat B natural. It is the ultimate perfectionist exit. Number 8. The fatal fact check of General Sedgwick. Confidence is a great quality in a leader, until it isn't. John Sedgwick was a high-ranking Union general during the American Civil War. He was a soldier's soldier, a man who believed that a general should be seen on the front lines, showing no fear so that his men would show no fear. During the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse in 1864, Sedgwick was directing his artillery. Confederate sharpshooters were about 1,000 yards away, and their bullets were whistling past the Union lines. His soldiers were instinctively ducking and diving for cover. Sedgwick was embarrassed by them. He stood bolt upright, walked into the open, and laughed. He told his men, "What, men dodging this way for single bullets? What will you do when they open fire along the whole line?" To prove his point, he looked toward the distant tree line where the snipers were hidden and shouted his final famous observation. They couldn't hit an elephant at this distance. Seconds later, a sharpshooter's bullet hit him directly under the left eye. He was dead before he hit the ground. It is history's most immediate and brutal fact check.
Number 9. The Exhausted Lion. Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill was a man of words. He won a Nobel Prize for literature. He rallied the world against the darkness of the 1940s with some of the greatest speeches ever spoken in the English language. He was a man of action, cigars, and brandy. But by 1965, the great lion was 90 years old. He had seen 2 world wars. He had seen the rise and fall of empires. He had seen the world change from horse-drawn carriages to nuclear weapons. He was simply tired. After suffering a massive stroke, he lay in his bed for 9 days. He wasn't interested in making one last roaring speech. He didn't want to talk about the bright, sunlit uplands. He looked at his son-in-law, sighed a breath that carried the weight of a century, and whispered, "I am bored with it all." Then he slipped into a coma and died. It is a devastatingly honest admission. After a life of maximum intensity, the greatest orator of the 20th century didn't go out with a bang, he went out with a yawn. He was ready to clock out because the show had simply gone on too long. Number 10. The ultimate preview of Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs spent his entire life looking at the next big thing. He was the master of the one more thing announcement. He lived in the future, obsessing over how humans would interact with technology. When he was dying in 2011,
surrounded by his family. He wasn't looking at his iPhone or his bank account. According to his sister, Mona Simpson, Jobs' breathing changed. He looked over the shoulders of his family members, staring at a point in the room that was empty to everyone else. His face transformed. He didn't look afraid. He looked like he was seeing the greatest piece of technology ever designed. He looked into the void and gave the ultimate product review. He whispered, "Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Oh, wow." From the man who spent his life trying to wow the world, this was the ultimate teaser. Whatever he saw on the other side, it apparently exceeded even his impossibly high standards. It was the perfect one more thing to end the most influential life in tech. But now, I have to ask you, and I genuinely want you to be honest in the comments. If you were staring down the Reaper right now, what would your actual, honest last words be? No faking it, no quoting a philosopher. Based on your life, your habits, and your personality, what is your final mic drop? Drop your answers below. The weirder and more honest, the better. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button to join the Legal Addict community, and smash the like button if you think you could out-sass Emperor Vespasian. I'll see you in the next one, where we keep digging up the truth behind history's most chaotic moments. Stay weird.